I booked a table for 6 to celebrate our 17th anniversary. By 7:35, chairs were still empty. No calls, just polite cancellations. And my husband a text big meeting. Rain check. Love you. I smiled, poured the wine, and quietly realized I wasn't being forgotten. I was being replaced. That night, I didn't cry. I went home, found his phone, and saw the message that shattered everything. Our cabin looks perfect. Can't wait for this weekend. He had plans. Just not with me. My name is Delilah. I'm 41 years old, a senior lecturer in marketing at a university in Seattle. To my colleagues and students, I'm the composed, articulate woman who starts her lectures with a warm smile and ends them with a thoughtful question. My lectures are always prepared, my heels never scuffed, and my coffee always black. What most of them don't know is how deeply I've mastered the art of pretending. I've been married to Brandon for 17 years. A partner at a prestigious law firm, he's everything the world defines as successful, eloquent, sharp-dressed, and always a step ahead. We met in our early 20s when ambition was romantic and the future was a shared canvas we couldn't wait to paint together. People often told us we looked like the couple on magazine covers, polished, coordinated, safe. In Christmas cards, we stood shoulder to shoulder in front of snow-dusted pines beaming. On social media, we posted our annual vacations like clockwork: Paris, Maui, Vermont in the fall. Everything looked perfect. But perfection, as I've learned, is a delicate veneer. And over time, even the most seamless mask begins to crack. The signs were subtle at first. Brandon's late nights grew longer, then more frequent. His conversations got shorter. He stopped asking about my lectures or mentioning his cases at the dinner table. There were weeks when we felt more like roommates than partners. The warmth in his eyes cooled, and though his voice never raised, it no longer carried softness. And still I held on because routine can become a kind of comfort even when it hurts. We didn't have children. It wasn't for lack of trying in the early years, but after 2 miscarriages and a string of hushed hospital visits, we stopped. Or more accurately, I stopped trying and Brandon stopped mentioning it. We filled the silence with work, travel, and the comfort of predictability. So when our 17th anniversary approached, I decided to do something different, something intentional. I made a reservation at Lumiere, a romantic candlelit French restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of the city. It was one of those places we always talked about going to but never did. Either work got in the way or the timing wasn't right. But this time I planned ahead. I booked a table for 6, Brandon and me, his parents who adored him, and our closest couple friends, Marissa and Jonah. I wanted to surprise him. To pull us both out of the slow, numbing fog that had crept into our marriage. I spent the week thinking about every detail. I bought a new navy wrap dress that Brandon had once said made my eyes look like the ocean. I chose a table by the window with a view of the harbor. I pre-selected a bottle of wine I knew he loved. I even called his mother to confirm she could attend. "We'll be there," she said. "I can't wait." On the night of the dinner, I arrived early. The maitre d' greeted me warmly and led me to the table. The linens were crisp, the silverware gleamed, and a gentle string quartet played in the background. It was all so elegant, so peaceful, exactly what I had hoped for. I sat down, nerves fluttering like wings in my chest, and waited. And waited. The clock ticked past 6:30. Then 6:45. I texted Brandon. No reply. At 7:00, I called his parents. No answer. At 7:15, I called Marissa. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Jonah's not feeling well, we can't make it." I called Brandon again. Voicemail. By 7:30, the table was still empty, 6 polished chairs, untouched glasses, a full bottle of wine, and me. No one came. The waiter approached gently. "Would you like to order, ma'am?" I smiled. Or tried to. "Just a glass of water for now." And as he walked away, I looked at the 5 other empty seats and thought, this is what the end of something looks like, not loud or messy. Just quiet. Quiet enough to hear your own heart breaking. The water glass sweated silently in front of me, untouched. Around the room, couples leaned close, laughter bubbling up like champagne, soft forks and whispered toasts filling the space. I sat perfectly still, back straight, napkin folded neatly on my lap, an actress waiting for a cue that would never come. I checked my phone again. No new messages. Brandon's name sat at the top of my screen like an accusation. I called him one last time, the dial tone buzzing like a flatline in my ear. Voicemail again. I tried his parents. Straight to voicemail. I tried Marissa one more time. This time she answered. Delilah, she said, voice low, like she had just stepped into a closet. I thought Brandon told you. We couldn't make it tonight. Jonah got pulled into a work thing. I'm sorry, it totally slipped my mind to text you. I thought he told you. She trailed off. The words felt hollow. He didn't, I said softly. A pause. I'm so sorry. We'll make it up to you, I promise. I hung up before she could finish the sentence. My hand felt cold against the stem of the wine glass I ordered next, Chablis dry, chilled, sharp. I took a slow sip, letting the acidity cut through the ache building in my chest. Then, just after 7:45, Brandon finally texted. Big meeting came up with the acquisition team. Totally blindsided. I'll explain later. Love you. Love you. I stared at the words like they belonged to someone else's marriage. A decade ago, that phrase would have made me smile in the middle of a hectic day. Now it felt as impersonal as an auto-signature on a work email. I didn't reply. Something in me shifted, then subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first tilt of the earth before a quake. It wasn't sadness exactly. That had already seeped in. No, this was a reckoning. A space between shock and clarity. I looked again at the empty chairs around me. My gaze drifted to the plate set across from mine, the one I had imagined Brandon sitting behind, eyes crinkling with laughter, maybe reaching for my hand across the table. But there was nothing. Just linen and silver and absence. I stood up. Would you like to cancel your order, ma'am? The waiter asked gently as I reached for my clutch. I hesitated. Number. Leave it. Someone might want to eat. It wasn't a joke, but he smiled politely as though it was. I gave him a tight nod and walked out, my heels tapping like a ticking clock across the marble floor. Outside, the city breathed in golden light. Cars slid by. Pedestrians in scarves and date-night jackets leaned into each other, laughing, unaware of the woman who stood perfectly still on the sidewalk like a misplaced piece in a romantic puzzle. My phone vibrated again. A second message from Brandon. Really sorry, babe. I'll make it up to you this weekend. Maybe that new brunch place you mentioned. Brunch. After standing me up at our anniversary dinner, after letting his parents and our friends vanish into a collective silence, he offered brunch. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket without replying. Then I began walking. No destination, just movement. My mind raced with questions I didn't yet have the courage to say out loud. Why hadn't anyone shown up? Why had Brandon failed to even call? Why did Marissa's voice sound rehearsed, like she was reading from a script someone else had written? And more importantly, why didn't any of this feel surprising? That was the question that clung to me as I turned the corner and passed familiar shops in an unfamiliar daze. There had been signs. I'd simply chosen not to see them. Or maybe I had seen them every late night, every distracted kiss, every time he flinched when I mentioned Jenna's name from one of his office stories, and quietly tucked them away, not out of trust but out of fear. Because when you open the door to doubt, it's hard to close it again. And on this night, the silence had finally spoken. It told me, look deeper. Something is already broken. By the time I reached our street, I had walked nearly 2 miles without realizing it. I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the sidewalk staring at our darkened windows. The porch light glowed faintly, casting a golden hue on the roses I had planted 3 years ago. I had hoped they'd symbolize renewal. Now they looked like actors playing their parts in a story I no longer believed in. Inside, Brandon wasn't home yet. And I no longer expected him to be. When I opened the front door, I was greeted not by the warmth of home but by the stillness of something fading. The air was too quiet, too perfect, like a stage after the actors have exited but the lights haven't yet gone down. The house didn't feel lived in, it felt paused. I took off my coat slowly, carefully hanging it on the rack by the door like I always did. Even now, I moved out of habit. My shoes clicked softly against the hardwood as I stepped into the living room. The cushions on the couch were still perfectly fluffed. The scent of Brandon's cologne lingered faintly layered over the subtle trace of laundry detergent and lemonwood polish. Clean. Orderly. Lifeless. Upstairs, the hallway light was on a warm glow spilling beneath the door of our bedroom. I climbed the stairs without meaning to, as though pulled by something unseen like gravity or inevitability. With every step, a part of me begged to stop. To turn back. To choose sleep or ignorance or anything but what I might find on the other side of that door. But I didn't stop. The bedroom door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Brandon was there asleep on his side of the bed, shirt still buttoned, face turned slightly toward the window. He looked peaceful. Innocent almost. If I had come home 30 minutes later, I might have kissed his forehead and climbed into bed, burying the ache in my chest until morning. But tonight had already changed something in me. And then I saw it, his phone lying face up on the nightstand screen, still faintly lit. A soft pulse like the flicker of a heartbeat in a hospital room. A message preview glowed against the darkness. Jenna can't wait for this weekend. Our cabin looks perfect. I stood still for several long seconds, reading that one sentence over and over. My own reflection stared back at me from the window behind him, glassy-eyed and pale. Our cabin. She said like this was normal. Like there was history. Not just a spontaneous affair or a fleeting mistake, but something established. Intimate. Planned. I reached for the phone. For 17 years, I had never opened Brandon's phone. I believed in boundaries. In privacy. In trust. Even when I had felt his distance growing, I refused to cross that line because crossing it meant admitting something might really be wrong. But I was past that now. My fingers moved without hesitation. I entered the passcode, our wedding date. 4 digits etched into memory. 4 digits that once marked the beginning of a life I thought we were building together. The screen unlocked. And in a matter of seconds, my marriage unraveled in the palm of my hand. There were messages, so many messages. Some short and teasing, others long and winding, like the kind of conversations we used to have in the beginning. They sent each other songs, memes, morning selfies. There were nicknames. Complaints about work. Shared meals. Late-night check-ins. Photos. Dozens of them. Jenna in a sundress, Brandon behind her, his arms around her waist. The two of them at a vineyard. On a hiking trail. In a hotel room mirror. Her legs curled beneath her, his smile pressed into her neck. I recognized the smile. It was the one he used to give me when no one else was looking. One message in particular caught my eye. A calendar screenshot. Team strategy call Friday 7:30 p.m. Except it wasn't a call. It was a reservation. At Lumiere. Window seat. Just like mine. I set the phone down on the edge of the bed, as if it were something fragile and venomous all at once. My hands were trembling now, not from rage, but from something far colder, recognition. This didn't start last week. This had been happening for months. Almost a year, if the earliest messages were any indication. And all that time I had been setting the table, folding his socks, calling his mother, hosting holidays, picking up dry cleaning, planning anniversary dinners, while he had been planning her. I stood there frozen, the room spinning quietly around me. Brandon shifted in his sleep. His brow furrowed slightly as if he sensed a storm stirring in the room. I wondered if in his dreams he was with her now in that cabin. Laughing, pouring wine, undressing her in firelight. I backed away from the bed slowly, not wanting to wake him. I couldn't look at his face, not tonight. Maybe not ever again. In the hallway bathroom, I flicked on the light and stared at my own reflection in the mirror. The woman who stared back at me didn't cry. Her eyes were rimmed red but dry. Her lips were pressed into a quiet, resolved line. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was awake. And for the first time in a long time, she saw everything clearly. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone across the room or dump water on Brandon's sleeping face. I didn't pace the hallway or collapse to the floor in sobs. Those were the scenes I'd seen in movies, read in books, outbursts, fury, chaos. But reality rarely comes with theatrics. Instead, I stood very still. Like a lake just before a storm, stillness doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something deeper is forming under the surface, quiet, cold, and far more dangerous than noise. I placed the phone gently back on the nightstand, wiped my hands on my robe, and walked into the bathroom. I turned the water to the hottest setting I could stand and stepped under the spray. The water slammed against my skin, a shock at first. But I didn't flinch. I let it hit me like 1,000 tiny needles, scalding and cleansing. My fingers gripped the cold porcelain tiles as the heat wrapped around me. I stood still, not moving, not crying. Only breathing. Steam filled the room, curling into the mirrors, curling around my thoughts. I imagined it washing something off me. Years of self-doubt, of suppressing questions, of rationalizing the distance, the late nights, the changed cologne, the unfamiliar softness in his voice when he talked about just work. I had clung to the version of him I wanted to believe in so tightly that I didn't see how he'd already let go of me. I stayed there longer than I needed to until the water began to cool and the air became heavy. When I turned the faucet off, the silence was absolute. I dried off slowly, wrapping myself in the thick white towel we'd picked out together on our 10th anniversary trip. Funny how many things in this house had been bought with love and now sat next to betrayal. The mirror was fogged. I wiped a small circle with my hand and stared into it. My reflection didn't look broken. It looked awake, stripped of illusion, of denial. The eyes that looked back at me were steady, alert, not waiting for someone else to save her. Back in the bedroom, Brandon hadn't moved. He was on his back now, mouth slightly open, the kind of deep, unbothered sleep only possible when your conscience is quiet. I lay beside him, the mattress familiar and suddenly foreign. I turned away from him, staring at the wall, my body taut like a wire. The room was dark, but my thoughts were sharp. I listened to his breath, slow and rhythmic, each exhale like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. I didn't close my eyes. I wasn't ready for sleep. My mind kept replaying the messages, the photos, the little moments that now felt like betrayals. Her smile in that red dress. His jokes. That look in his eyes, so full of ease, the kind of ease that had vanished from us years ago. I thought about our anniversary dinner. How he had let me plan it, let me believe it would be a moment for us. How he had knew full well that he would be at that same restaurant days later, not with me but with her. That was what finally shattered something in me, not the lies but the effortlessness with which he lived them. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb him, and reached for his laptop. He always brought it home, and I knew the password by heart. He had never bothered to change it. That small detail struck me as both foolish and deeply arrogant. I logged in. His calendar opened, color-coded and neat like everything else about him. Friday, 7:30 p.m., Lumiere reservation. There it was, exactly as I expected. Brandon Carter. Lumiere. Window table. Camus pre-selected. But it was the note beneath that made my breath catch. Tell her about the Colorado expansion. Lay groundwork for New York. Not only was he wining and dining his mistress, he was bringing her into his future. Into the spaces I used to imagine myself. He wasn't hiding her anymore. He was building something with her, plans, possibilities, maybe even promises. I closed the laptop. Then I picked up my phone. I opened Lumiere's website and began clicking through the reservation system, each step a strange act of composure. A performance of calm when every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. Table for two. Friday night. 7:30 p.m. When the screen asked for preferences, I typed window seat if available. Preferably near the reservation under Brandon Carter. We're associated. The reservation was confirmed within seconds. I stared at the screen, at the digital evidence of what I'd just set in motion. I didn't smile. This wasn't satisfaction, it was clarity. People think strength is rage or vengeance or shouting in public, but real strength, I've learned, is restraint. The ability to plan, to act, to strike only when you're ready, and never to warn them that it's coming. I set the phone down, lay back beside Brandon, and watched the first sliver of dawn begin to touch the ceiling. This time I would not look away. By morning the world outside had resumed its usual rhythm, cars moving past, coffee, brewing, emails chiming into inboxes. But inside me something had fundamentally changed. I moved like a woman standing in the wreckage of her own home, calmly deciding what was worth saving and what could burn. I sat at the kitchen table, the one we picked out together at a little boutique in Bellingham years ago. The sunlight stretched across the wood like it always did. The only thing different was me. In front of me, my laptop, a mug of untouched coffee, and the name that had haunted my dreams, Jenna O'Connor. I had only heard her mentioned a few times. Our new communications lead, Brandon, had said offhandedly months ago. She's bright, a bit too chatty but sharp. Now I stared at her name typed into the search bar. Her professional profile came up first. Polished, strategic, blonde. Of course. Then came her social media. I scrolled through carefully. I didn't need to see the beach selfies or her wine night posts with coworkers. I was looking for something else. Some thread I could pull. And then I found it. A photo from last fall. Jenna in front of an architectural model beaming. Behind her, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, strong jawline, and a warm smile. He stood with his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not possessive but certain. The caption read, "Proud of my husband Andrew O'Connor for his stunning work on the Bellevue Design Collective." I clicked on his name. His page was public. A professional profile mostly. Principal architect at a boutique design firm in downtown Seattle. A portfolio of urban projects. A short bio, believer in clean lines, sustainable structures, and honest living. The last phrase hit harder than I expected. Honest living. I stared at the screen, lips parted slightly. Not in shock, but recognition. Another person. Another spouse. Another life being quietly hollowed out by the same betrayal. And then slowly an idea began to take shape. At first I dismissed it as too cruel, too elaborate, too unlike me. But the longer I sat there, the clearer it became. This wasn't revenge, it was invitation. To the truth. I opened my university email and began typing. Subject: speaking invitation, Sustainable Urban Design Series. Dear Mr. O'Connor. My name is Delilah Carter and I'm a senior lecturer in marketing and community development at Westmore University in Seattle. We are currently curating a speaker series on architecture and the future of human-centered design. Your recent work on the Riverlight project has come highly recommended by our planning board, and I believe your voice would bring tremendous value to our students. If you're open to a brief meeting to discuss the opportunity, I'd love to take you to dinner this Friday at Lumiere at 7:30 p.m. It's an informal way to connect and explore how your work might fit into our upcoming seminar. Warm regards, Delilah Carter. I read the email 3 times. It was professional, respectful, and entirely truthful, except for one thing: there was no planning board. Just me. I hesitated for a moment, finger hovering above the trackpad. Then I clicked send. A strange calm settled over me after that. The kind that comes after you take the first step off a cliff, not because you want to fall, but because you're done clinging to the edge. Less than 2 hours later, Andrew replied. Subject: re-speaking invitation. Hi Delilah, thank you for the kind message. I've been looking for ways to get more involved in the education space, and this sounds like a wonderful initiative. Friday at Lumiere works perfectly. I'll see you at Set Trent. Warmly, Andrew O'Connor. I sat back staring at his name. My heart thudded, not with fear, but something sharper: anticipation. He didn't know, not yet. But he would. And maybe, just maybe, when the curtain lifted on this carefully staged evening, neither of us would have to face the truth alone. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. All day I moved through my lectures like a woman floating just above the surface of her life. My students didn't notice anything different. I still smiled at their questions, still reminded them about the upcoming group presentations. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm pulsed in my chest, measured and sharp. Tonight wasn't just a confrontation. It was revelation, one I had orchestrated down to the minute. At home I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have. The wine-red dress I chose clung to me like memory. I hadn't worn it in years. Brandon once told me it was a bit much for dinner. I wore it anyway. Tonight I wouldn't dress for his comfort. I would dress for my clarity. I swept my hair into a soft bun, letting a few strands fall loose, and slid on the heels I kept boxed for special occasions. As I fastened a delicate gold bracelet, the one I'd nearly pawned after our third miscarriage, I looked at my reflection and whispered silently, "You already survived worse than this." The city shimmered as I stepped out of the cab in front of Lumiere. The doorman smiled politely as I walked past him, the cool night air brushing against my skin like the last gentle warning before a storm. Inside, the restaurant glowed with the warmth of old-world elegance, crystal chandeliers, candlelight white linens, a low hum of violin music weaving through clinking glasses. The maitre d' greeted me by name and led me to our table. "Would you still prefer to sit near the Carter reservation?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said, steady. Close enough to see their expressions, but not too close to interfere. He didn't flinch, he only nodded. The table was perfect. 2 seats. A clear view of the front entrance. A soft spotlight overhead that made the silverware gleam. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir and waited. At exactly 7:27, Andrew O'Connor walked in. He was taller in person and somehow more grounded than his online presence suggested. His gray jacket fit neatly across broad shoulders and his eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. When he spotted me, he smiled, polite, open, unaware. "Miss Carter," he said warmly as he approached. "Thank you for the invitation. This place is incredible." "Thank you for coming on such short notice," I replied, rising to shake his hand. "And please call me Delilah." He took his seat across from me and looked around appreciatively. "I've passed this restaurant for years and always meant to try it. Funny how life works." Funny wasn't the word I would have chosen. We started with small talk. I asked him about the Bellevue project, and he spoke passionately about form meeting function, about design as emotional language. I nodded, listened, asked thoughtful questions, though half of my mind was tuned to the entrance like a radar waiting to pick up the first flicker of movement. Then it happened. At 7:39, they walked in. Brandon wore the gray blazer I bought him for our anniversary 2 years ago, the one he'd said was too nice to waste on clients. Jenna followed closely behind in a fitted emerald dress and a bold red lip, the kind of look you reserve for someone you want to impress or seduce. They were laughing. Not just polite laughter, but the kind that tilts your head back, that makes your eyes sparkle. Brandon's hand rested lightly on the small of her back as they approached the hostess stand. I didn't flinch. Andrew hadn't noticed them yet. I watched as Brandon spoke to the hostess. She smiled and nodded, leading them toward the window tables. Toward us. I took a slow sip of wine, keeping my tone even as Andrew finished a thought about biophilic design. "And do you find," I asked calmly, "that natural light affects how people move through space?" He smiled, thoughtful. "Absolutely. We design for emotion even when people don't realize it." From the corner of my eye, I saw Brandon pull out Jenna's chair. She touched his hand gently as she sat, her fingers lingering on his wrist. The way mine used to. I set my glass down and folded my hands in my lap. Andrew glanced toward the window casually, mid-sentence, and then paused. His eyes settled on the couple, and stayed. He tilted his head slightly, confusion knitting into his brow. He squinted as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew. "Is that?" He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't answer. I only said softly, "Excuse me for a moment. I'll be right back." I stood, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and walked toward the powder room. Every step felt deliberate, measured, like part of a ballet choreographed by heartbreak and restraint. It was time. The corridor outside the powder room was silent, dimly lit by wall sconces that flickered like candlelight. I stood there for a breath, one hand resting on the cool marble of the hallway wall, steadying myself. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to enter this moment with absolute clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was truth walking into the light. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, stepped back into the restaurant, and walked toward our table, toward the war zone, dressed as fine dining. Andrew sat where I'd left him, but his eyes were no longer on me. They were locked on the window table. His posture was rigid, fingers curled slightly on the linen napkin in his lap, the look on his face somewhere between recognition and disbelief. Brandon was mid-laugh when he saw me. It was instant. He froze, his expression falling away like a mask dropping to the floor. His hand, which had been mid-gesture over a bottle of wine, paused mid-air. Jenna followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. She turned slowly, still smiling, until she saw me. Her face drained of color. Eyes wide. Shoulders locking into place like she had been caught shoplifting and didn't know where to run. I didn't rush. I didn't look away. I simply returned to our table, placed my hand gently on the back of my chair, and looked at Andrew. "Would you," I said softly, "like to meet your wife?" He turned to me slowly, his face blank for a moment, as if language itself had left the room. Then he looked back at Jenna. It hit him like a wave breaking open something sacred. Jenna stood up as if pulled by strings, knocking her napkin to the floor. Her lips parted, trying to form a sentence, an explanation, a denial, anything. But no words came. Brandon rose too, but only halfway, like standing might acknowledge the reality of the moment. His mouth opened. "Delilah." I raised a hand, slightly gentle but firm. "No need," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is Brandon. My husband." The words didn't come out angry. They came out clean. Precise. As if I'd rehearsed them, not in sound, but in spirit. Jenna swayed slightly, one hand resting on the back of her chair for balance. Her eyes searched Andrew's face, pleading without words. Andrew remained seated, his jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. But I could feel it, the storm building beneath his skin. Not rage, not yet. Just grief, disoriented and raw. Around us the restaurant didn't stop. Silverware still clinked. Laughter still rose from other tables. The violinist near the bar kept playing, oblivious to the quiet collapse happening in the corner by the window. It was surreal. To know your life is breaking and watch the world continue as if nothing happened. I reached for my wine, took a sip, and looked back at them. "I thought I said you two might enjoy a night out. You made it look so lovely in the photos." Brandon's eyes flashed with something, shame maybe. Or the desperate calculation of a man trying to regain control of a situation he never thought would spin out of his grasp. "Delilah, I didn't." "You did," I said calmly. "Every day." For almost a year, Andrew stood now. Quietly. With the kind of grace that made the moment more painful, not less. He looked at Jenna, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. Finally, he asked, voice low, "Is it true?" She tried to speak. Her lips moved, but her voice cracked. "Andrew, I don't want a story," he said gently. "I just want the truth." Jenna's shoulders dropped. The fight left her eyes. And in that silence, I saw it happen, the moment when two people once tethered now stood on opposite ends of a chasm they had dug together. I looked at Brandon, and he looked at me, not like a husband caught in a lie, but like a man seeing a stranger who used to be his wife. He reached toward me slightly. "Delilah, please." I stepped back just once. And with the faintest smile I said, "I'm not here to argue, Brandon. I'm here to return what you left behind." Then I turned to Andrew, whose eyes were still fixed on the woman he thought he knew. "We can stay," I said, "or we can go. That part is up to you." He blinked once, then nodded. And in the quiet hum of candlelight and betrayal, the four of us stood frozen, four people who had loved, lied, and been broken open by the cost of pretending. The maitre d' reappeared like a ghost trained in subtle emergencies. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Would you prefer a private room, Miss Carter?" I didn't look at Brandon. I didn't look at Jenna. I turned only to Andrew. He nodded once. That was all I needed. "Yes," I replied. A table for four. Within moments, we were being ushered through a quiet hallway past velvet curtains and hushed diners who didn't know the tectonic shift happening just a few feet from their candlelit conversations. The private room was tucked into the back of the restaurant, a sanctuary or a cell depending on your truth. Inside, it was dimly lit. Intimate. Two sconces cast a golden wash across the white tablecloth. 4 chairs, crystal glasses. Polished silver. Everything perfect except for the people. We sat. Brandon across from me. Jenna next to him, eyes lowered. Andrew beside me, his face carved in stone. The silence settled, thick and immediate like fog pressing against glass. The waiter arrived to offer menus. I gave him a soft smile. "Number Nothing for now. He nodded, disappeared, and took the last pretense of normalcy with him. I folded my hands together, rested them gently on the edge of the table, and exhaled. Then I looked at Brandon. I read it all, I said. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Truth doesn't require volume to be devastating. He blinked slowly. Every message, I continued. Every photo, every reservation. Every night you said you were working late but were really with her. Brandon said nothing. Jenna shifted in her seat. Her hands twisted the corner of her linen napkin in her lap. I saw Santa Fe, I added. The hotel. The necklace. The weekend you told me you were at a leadership retreat. Jenna made a small sound like a gasp that never fully formed. Brandon opened his mouth, but I raised a hand gently. Number, please. Don't speak just to lessen the silence. Let it sit. Let it hurt. He closed his mouth again. Jenna leaned forward slightly. Her voice came out brittle. Delilah, I never wanted to hurt you. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I looked at her. I believe that, I said. But intentions don't erase choices. She swallowed hard. I felt invisible at home, and Brandon, he listened. He saw me. Andrew turned to her. Slowly. Precisely. And I didn't, he asked. Not loud, just broken. Jenna looked stricken. You asked me for a bigger home office, Andrew continued. So I designed you one. You said your mornings were too rushed, so I built you a custom breakfast nook by the window. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Just adrift. The sound of a man reviewing every detail of his kindness now refiled under irrelevant. Jenna's shoulders curled inward. I know. Brandon spoke then, voice low and desperate. Delilah, I know I failed you. But I never stopped loving you. I met his eyes, slowly. Not with hatred, but with clarity. This was never about love, I said. It was about respect. And you stopped giving me that a long time ago. He blinked. You didn't just lie to me, I added. You made me doubt myself. My instincts. My sanity. You stood beside me at family dinners, in wedding photos, at holiday parties, while carrying a lie in your pocket like a lucky coin. Brandon flinched. And this, I said, motioning gently to the space between us, isn't the end because you cheated. They all froze. This is the end because I finally started seeing myself again, and I realized I was disappearing next to you. The room was so silent I could hear the faint crackle of the candle flame. Jenna wiped a tear from her cheek. I didn't know how to stop. Once it started, it was like being seen for the first time. Andrew exhaled a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sigh at once. I saw you, Jenna, he said. Maybe not the way you wanted, but I saw you. She didn't respond. She only cried. I turned to Andrew, softening. I'm sorry you found out this way. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw something there I recognized. The look of someone who had trusted too long and doubted too late. You didn't just show me, he said. You saved me from staying blind. Then quietly, almost reverently, Brandon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. He placed it on the table. No words. Just a circle of metal. And somehow it felt heavier than everything he'd ever said. We sat in silence. No cutlery moved. No glasses clinked. Just four people sitting inside a room where truth finally had nowhere left to hide. I didn't slam the door when I left the private room at Lumiere. No dramatic exit, no parting scream. Just the soft click of heels on the marble floor and the quiet certainty of a woman who had already walked away in her heart long before she stood up from that table. Before I turned to go, I reached into my purse and placed a hotel key card beside the ring Brandon had laid down moments earlier. I'll be staying at the Halden Hotel tonight, I said, looking only at him. Room 1042. You're free to go home, pack what you need. I'll return once you've left. He blinked as if stunned. Delilah, wait. But I held up a hand. Not angry, just finished. I'm not leaving out of rage, I said. I'm leaving because there's nothing left to stay for. And then I walked out. The night outside greeted me like an old friend, bracing and still. The city hummed quietly in the distance, its lights blinking like Morse code in a language I didn't understand but somehow felt comforted by. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months it didn't catch in my throat. My feet carried me toward the hotel without thinking. Each step felt deliberate, rooted in something I hadn't felt in a long time: ownership. Not of a marriage or an image, but of myself. The front desk clerk handed me the key with a warm professional smile. "Enjoy your stay, Miss Carter." I nodded. "Thank you, I plan to." Inside, the suite's soft golden light spilled across the hardwood. The curtains were drawn open, revealing a sweeping view of the city skyline. A bottle of sparkling water sat on the counter beside a card that read, "Welcome." I almost laughed. I didn't cry. There was no storm left inside me. Just the quiet aftermath of a decision long overdue. I slipped off my heels and stood barefoot near the window, watching headlights pass below like trails of memory. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Then again. And again. "Brandon." A voicemail. Then a text. "Please talk to me, I'm begging you." Then another, "Let's go to counseling. Please. I'll do anything." And then, "It's over with Jenna," I told her. "She's gone." I stared at the screen, heart unmoved. Because none of it mattered anymore. He wasn't pleading for me. He was pleading for the version of me who used to forgive too easily, who covered up his flaws in public and defended him at family gatherings. But she didn't live here anymore. And I didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next morning when he called again, this time from a blocked number. Not the third day when a long email arrived in my inbox, 4 paragraphs of apology, introspection, regret. Too late. Truth, when delivered late, is just another form of manipulation. That week, Jenna quietly resigned from Brandon's firm. I received the university's HR notification in the middle of grading final projects. It was short and clinical. Effective immediately, Jenna O'Connor has stepped down to pursue other opportunities. There was no elaboration. But the whispers started anyway. In staff lounges. At happy hours. Between colleagues who didn't know the full story but knew enough to guess. They talked about her sudden disappearance. About Brandon's withdrawn demeanor at meetings. About the unspoken shift in tone when either of their names came up. I didn't participate, I didn't need to. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. What surprised most people, maybe even Brandon, was that I didn't spin the story, I didn't protect his name. I didn't say things just didn't work out or were taking some time. I told the truth. When my mother called to ask why Brandon hadn't joined us for Sunday dinner, I told her plainly, because he was unfaithful for nearly a year. I found out. There was a pause. Then a quiet, "Do you want me to come over?" "No," I said, exhaling. "I just want you to know, that's all." When our old couple friends reached out in whispers cloaked as concern, I was direct. Yes, he cheated. No, I'm not staying. And no, I don't feel ashamed. Some were shocked, some applauded. A few backed away, uncomfortable with the rawness of it. But I didn't care. I had spent too many years curating a life that looked good on paper. Dinners with matching plates. Holiday cards with soft lighting. Laughter that echoed just enough to sound believable. Now I wanted something real, even if it was cracked, even if it was lonely. I didn't crave perfection anymore. I craved peace. And peace never grows in the shadow of secrets. So I told the truth. Not to punish Brandon. Not to shame Jenna. But to free myself from the performance I had been cast in for far too long. Spring arrived earlier than anyone expected. The kind that crept in rather than exploded, the days slowly stretching, the air softening. On the tree-lined sidewalks near campus, the cherry blossoms began to bloom, scattering pale petals across the pavement like forgotten wishes from another lifetime. And for the first time in years, I wasn't counting what had ended. I was watching something begin. After Lumiere, after the quiet collapse and the unspoken goodbyes, I didn't go back to the house Brandon and I had lived in. I didn't need another reminder of the version of myself I had outgrown. Instead, I found a small apartment tucked above a used bookstore near the university. The kind of place with uneven floors and old windows that fogged up on rainy mornings. The building creaked at night. The kitchen had only one drawer that didn't stick. But it was mine. I painted one of the walls a deep forest green, bought a second-hand velvet armchair in burnt orange, hung fairy lights above my desk. My mother joked that it looked like the home of a college student rediscovering herself. Maybe it was. On the first night, I ate Chinese takeout cross-legged on the floor, still in my moving clothes, staring at the ceiling while soft jazz hummed from the radio. No television. No distractions. Just silence and the quiet realization that solitude didn't mean emptiness. It meant freedom. A week later, I signed up for a photography class offered at a local arts collective. I'd always been curious. But, like so many things, I'd filed it away in the someday drawer. Brandon used to call hobbies escapes for the bored. I no longer subscribed to his definitions of purpose. The first time I held a camera, something shifted. I found myself walking slower, noticing the world again. The way light curved through trees. The symmetry of fire escapes, the stillness in puddles after rain. I began to document these small, overlooked beauties, not for anyone else. Just to prove to myself that I could still see clearly. Andrew and I didn't talk much at first. A few simple messages always spaced days apart. Hope your week is kind to you. Saw this and thought of our conversation about light. They weren't romantic, they weren't loaded with subtext. They were gentle. Like someone placing a hand just close enough to remind you that you're not alone, but never close enough to make you move before you're ready. About a month after that night, Andrew sent me a photo. It was a black and white shot of the river behind his studio. Light was catching in the water like silver thread. Thought you'd appreciate the symmetry, he wrote. I did. So I sent one back, a photo I'd taken of a sunbeam hitting the window of the cafe near my apartment, illuminating a half-finished journal and a single cup of coffee. From there it became a kind of quiet ritual. No pressure. No timelines. Just two people sharing what they noticed. Eventually we met in person again. Tanner's Cafe, neutral ground. I chose it for its soft lighting, slow service, and the way the ivy curled around the window like it had lived there longer than the walls. I arrived early, ordered 2 lattes, and claimed the corner booth. He arrived 5 minutes later, a canvas notebook under one arm, wearing a navy pullover and a new softness in his eyes. Hi, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Hi, I replied. We didn't rush. We talked about things that weren't heavy: architecture, the difference between concrete and permanence, how memory hides in corners of buildings, and cups of tea. Then the conversation shifted. He told me about Jenna's last day. How she packed in silence. How she left behind a scarf he still hadn't thrown out. Not because he missed her, but because even endings deserve a moment. I told him how I still paused at certain intersections, expecting to see Brandon's car. That I wasn't mourning the man, I was grieving the version of myself that had needed to be chosen to feel worthy. I'm not trying to love again, I said. Not like before. He nodded. Me either. At least not blindly. We finished our coffee slowly. Before we left, he asked, "Would you like to see my studio sometime?" No pressure. Just light space shapes. You might enjoy it. I smiled. I'd like that, I said, but not as a date. He smiled back without flinching. Not as anything except two people learning to see again. And that's what it was. Not romance, not rescue, not rebound. Just the quiet discovery that even after ruin, life still rises. As we stepped outside, the late afternoon light caught on my scarf and a breeze danced through the leaves. We walked side by side for a block before parting ways, no promises, no what-ifs. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting to feel whole. I already was, just not in the way I had expected. A full year passed. And with it came the kind of quiet transformation you don't always see in the mirror but feel in the way you stand taller, breathe deeper, and no longer flinch when someone mentions his name. I had built a new life. Not a perfect one, not one free of memory, but one that belonged to me. It was a Thursday evening in early May when the invitation arrived. A formal envelope with the university's seal in navy wax. Inside, a card with delicate calligraphy. You are cordially invited to the retirement celebration of Professor Eleanor Benson after 42 years of service. Professor Benson had been my advisor during graduate school. A brilliant no-nonsense woman who once told me a sharp mind is nothing without a clear spine. I owed much of who I became as a lecturer and as a woman to her quiet mentorship, so of course I went. The event was held at the Lyre Hotel downtown, an elegant ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, strings of lights woven through hanging orchids, and soft jazz drifting through the air like memory. I arrived early in a navy dress with my mother's pearl earrings and a slim clutch containing a rare signed copy of a marketing book Professor Benson had once mentioned wistfully in class. It was a gift I had hunted for across several states. Somehow it felt symbolic, offering a piece of legacy to the woman who helped me shape mine. I was sipping sparkling water and greeting former classmates when I saw him. Brandon. He stood near the back of the room by the wine table alone. His suit hung a little looser than I remembered. His once confident posture was softer now. A touch of gray threaded through his temples. But it wasn't the physical change that struck me. It was the stillness. He was no longer performing. When our eyes met, there was no gasp, no freeze-frame moment. Just a long pause between two people who had once shared everything and now shared only the knowledge of how far apart they had traveled. He approached slowly, carefully, like someone walking across a frozen lake unsure where it might crack. "Delilah," he said, his voice raspier than I remembered. "I didn't think I'd see you here." "I didn't think I'd see you either," I said gently. He offered a half smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you moved," he said. "That you're teaching full-time now. And photography too," I nodded. "It's been good. Quiet. Honest." He looked down for a moment, then back up. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry people say to get something back, just the kind that's long overdue." His eyes were tired but sincere. "I believe you," I said softly. He blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "I believe you're sorry. And I forgive you." A breath passed between us. He started to speak again, but I raised a hand. "I forgive you," I repeated, "but that doesn't mean I forget, or that I would ever go back." He nodded slowly, his throat bobbing. "I didn't expect you to," he said. "You look well." I smiled. "I am." Just then a familiar warmth touched my shoulder. I turned to see Andrew arriving in a soft charcoal shirt, his presence calm and grounding. He didn't interrupt, he just stood beside me. And gently, without words, slipped his fingers into mine. Brandon noticed. He gave a quiet nod, one of recognition, maybe resignation. And then, without another word, he stepped back, turned away, and melted into the crowd of soft music and wine glasses and fading memories. I watched him go. Not with sadness, but with peace. Not all goodbyes happen at the moment of separation. Some take a year. Some take a glance across a crowded room. And some take nothing more than letting go, finally, fully and without regret. They say the hardest part of any story is the ending. But the truth is, some endings aren't loud or dramatic. Some don't come with a final door slam or a tearful goodbye. Some endings arrive silently, like the soft closing of a book after the last page has been turned. This was mine. It's strange to look back now on the woman I used to be. The version of Delilah who always smiled through silence, who made excuses for late nights, who folded herself smaller and smaller just to fit inside someone else's expectations of love. She was kind, she was loyal, but she was tired. And she didn't know it yet. Until the night she reserved a table for 6 at Lumiere. A celebration she planned with love and intention. One she thought would be filled with laughter, clinking glasses, stories shared over candlelight, but no one came. Not her husband, not his parents. Not their so-called couple friends who had suddenly forgotten, canceled, or gone silent. I sat alone in that restaurant, staring at the perfectly set table. 6 places. 6 empty chairs. And the aching realization that I had spent years hosting a life that no one else was showing up for. That's when something shifted. That's when the unraveling began. And through that unraveling, through the betrayal, the truth, the confrontation, the grief, I didn't break. I shed. I peeled off the layers of performance. The practiced forgiveness, the curated perfection. And underneath it all, I found someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Me. Photography taught me how to see again, not just with my eyes, but with stillness, with wonder, with patience. I captured reflections that reminded me how the world bends light even when broken. I stood in places where silence wasn't loneliness, it was clarity. And Andrew, he didn't save me. He stood beside me while I saved myself. We don't promise forever, we promise presence. No masks. No pretense. Just truth, even when it's quiet, even when it's messy, even when it's still healing. So yes, I once reserved a table for 6 and no one came. But that night I began to leave a life where I was constantly waiting for others to choose me. And I chose myself instead. Betrayal didn't destroy me. It simply removed a mask I had worn too long, the mask of the perfect wife, the agreeable partner, the silent absorber of everything unsaid. I'm Delilah. And I am no longer surviving for someone else's comfort. I am living for my own truth. So, if you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late, it's not. If you're sitting at a table alone wondering if your worth depends on who shows up, it doesn't. Sometimes the most important people you'll ever meet are the versions of yourself waiting on the other side of letting go. And when you meet her, when you finally see her clearly, you'll realize that was the real beginning all along.